work in the academic computing department, and I'm going to be taking you through the session today and the session next week, looking at the basics of Adobe Photoshop. So it's going to be a kind of start off really simple and gradually get slightly more complex as we work through the examples that we're going to work through. The way that we usually do these Google Meet sessions is it's probably best if you just watch and maybe take some notes if there's anything that you think is worth writing down. You won't really be able to work along with me because we don't have any way of giving you the files. So if you just watch what I'm doing, and if at any point you have a question, you can either just turn your mic on and say something. I should hopefully be able to hear you. Or if you try that and I don't respond, maybe just drop a message in the chat window here. I'll leave that chat window open the whole time, so if anyone says anything, I should notice it. And hopefully we'll learn some things about how Photoshop works. So what I'm going to do first off, I'm just going to turn my camera off because you probably don't need to see me in the corner of your screen. Can everybody hear me okay? I should just check everyone can hear what I'm saying. If you can hear me, just type something in the chat window. Somebody's put their hand up. How do I respond to this? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, thanks, Sonia. Okay, so if you can hear me and you can see my screen, that's everything that I need to know for me to make a start with the session. So I think what I'll do is I'll just crack on, and like I said, if at any point something isn't making any sense, just type in the chat window and I will back up and try and explain in a different way, or talk to you about what it is that you're not understanding. So what is Photoshop? Well, it's the kind of industry standard image editing piece of software. It does about 1 million different things. You can use it for simple photo editing, multi-layered compositions, so collaging different elements together. Use it to make graphic layouts, use it to work with type, use it to combine all of the above, animation. It basically does lots of different things. They've kind of gradually jammed more and more features into it over the years, and they never tend to really take anything away. So it now does a vast array of different things. We'll be touching on a few of them in this session and next week's session. So rather than just sort of talking about what it is and what it does, I just want to sort of start to just immediately do some stuff and talk you through what we can see on the screen as a kind of part of the process. So I'm just going to open a file so we've got something to look at, and so we can kind of investigate the Photoshop interface. If you just bear with me for 1 minute while I find my file that I want to open. So I'm going to just go to open in this welcome screen here, or I can go file and open at the top of the screen there. Or whenever you're in one of these menus, if you see something like this next to a feature, so it says open there, and then over here we've got the symbol for the command key and the letter O. That's the keyboard shortcut for doing that particular thing. So you can hit Command and O to open a file if you want. And I'm going to go to my desktop and have a look for my first thing. So it's brought it straight into Photoshop. So the focus today is getting familiar with a variety of different tools, and we're going to kind of explore them through some simple processes. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just sort of investigate the interface. So the first thing I want to do is draw your attention to this little thing here. So if you've used Photoshop in the past, maybe last year, you maybe would have seen this before. this little thing floating around on the screen. This is something that they've put in this most recent version of Photoshop. So I'll just kind of try and explain what this is all about. This is what's called the contextual taskbar. So it just sort of floats around on the top of the screen, and it's what I guess the best way to describe it is it's context dependent, quick access to certain features. It's sort of the software tries to make a guess at what it is you might want to do next, and it suggests some options. So it's for this image, it's suggested we could maybe select the subject, or we could remove the background. I'm not sure. I'm still kind of getting used to this myself, really. This little icon here where you've got 3 dots, if you go into there, if you don't want to use the context bar, you can hide it within that menu there. And then if you want to bring it back, you can bring it back from the window menu up there. You can also choose to pin it in a particular position. So I'm going to pin it up there, and now it'll just sit in that position on the screen all the time instead of moving around when I start doing different things. But how you want to work with it is up to you. So let's see what happens if we have a go with this. So I'm going to click select the subject. Let's see what it does. So it's deduced, it's looked at the image, it's analyzed it, and it's decided that this is the subject in this photo, and it's done its best to make a selection. So when you've got something selected in Photoshop, you will see what is usually referred to as this marching ants or moving kind of line drawn around the edge of what you've got selected. So it's done its best to kind of decide what I wanted to select, but it's not done a really that good of a job of it, really. It's kind of missed some bits here. The edge is a bit dodgy, but it might be good as a kind of starting point basic selection. So now that I've got a selection there, you can see that in this context bar, it's now providing me with a bunch of alternative options. So I could modify the selection, invert it, and so on. There's a bunch of different possibilities that it's presented me with there. But the one that I'm going to go for is this one here, deselect. And that's just let go of that selection there. So depending on what you're doing, you'll see different things in this little bar here. But it is quite handy. It does sort of speed your workflow up a little bit in some instances. So before I get too bogged down in talking about that, I just want to sort of briefly talk about where things are in terms of the user interface. So like all the Adobe software, you've got a sort of menu at the very top of the screen with a sort of selection of drop-down menus for different kinds of tasks. So everything in the file menu is to do with opening, closing, saving files, exporting them as a new kind of file, that sort of stuff you'll find in there. Then we have the edit drop-down where we've got different kind of edit functions. So the first sort of thing that you'll find in the edit menu is the option to undo the last thing that you did. And then you've got standard things like copy, cut, paste, and so on. And then a bunch of more sort of advanced things down here, some of which we'll look at later. Then we've got the image menu, layers menu, the text menu or type menu, a whole menu to do with making and refining selections, filters, 3D I wouldn't even bother with because it doesn't really work anymore. And then you've got your view menu and your window menu. So the window menu is quite important. Everything in this list here, it refers to one or more of these little panels that you'll find on this side of the screen here. So we've got all these different little sort of nested menus, and each one of these you can also get to from the window menu. You look there, we've got a properties panel there, and that is talking about this panel here. So if ever something is not there that you're looking for, like let's say for some reason your layers menu was not there anymore, you can always just go to your window menu and look down the list and tick the thing that you want to bring back. So why would I say that maybe your layers menu might not be there? Well, the way they've designed the interface is that it's all kind of modular, as in each of the bits can be kind of moved and rearranged freely. So I can kind of change the position of these little panels here. I can tear them off and have them open over here like that. I can kind of freely rearrange it to suit how I want to work. So let's say I pulled my layers panel off. This is something that I find myself doing quite a lot. I might take the layers panel off there and maybe make it a really long layers panel. If I've got loads of layers in my project, I might want to do that so I can see better what I'm doing. But let's say I've done that and then maybe I accidentally clicked on this little X thing. That's closed the layers panel. So now it's no longer over here where you would normally find it. So I've got two options if I do something like that. I could either go into that window menu that I talked about a minute ago, and I can find my layers and I can click on it to turn it back on. And there it is, it's back again. Or I could just simply go to this little button up in the top corner here. So right in the very top corner, we have this icon here. I wonder if I can zoom in on it. Yes. So right up there, there's a little button that looks like that. So in there, we have access to what are called different workspaces. So if I click on it and open that up, you see there, the default one is this Essentials workspace, and that's the one that I generally tend to work in. But you've also got different ones for different kinds of workflow. So if you were animating, you would maybe go into the motion workspace, and you see it's got a different arrangement of things on the screen. A painting workflow has a different set of menus, photography and graphics and web design. You get different arrangement of the menus to suit those different kinds of tasks. Oops, what's happened? It's crashing. I don't like that. I'm just going to give it a second to catch up with whatever it is that it's thinking about. A great start. Okay. So let's say I've kind of made some edits to the workspace and maybe I've moved a bunch of things around, and then I just want to go back to the sort of default arrangement of stuff. I can always do that by going into here and looking for this option to reset the workspace. So if I click there, that's put it all back to how it was at the beginning. And hey presto, my layers panel has now reappeared in the usual spot down here. So that button there, very useful, very handy. Moving back over to this side of the screen, on this very far edge here over on the left hand side, we've got what is called the tools section. So all of these are different Photoshop editing tools. Obviously there's quite a lot of them, and I'm not going to go through every single one, but we're going to kind of encounter various ones as we go through the rest of today's session. So the tools all live over here. Any of the tools that have a little triangle in the corner, so if I zoom in on this, you can see pretty much all of them have got a little white triangle in the corner there. What that's telling you is there's actually more than one kind of variation or similar tools nested behind that button. And to see what there is, you can hold your mouse button down on the button, and then this little menu will pop out and you'll see there's these different versions of that tool there that you can access. So if you're looking for something and you can't find it, it might be that it's nested behind a particular button of a different tool. Just going to zoom back out. Something else that's very useful, and this is again a fairly recent addition to Photoshop, is that when you hover your mouse over any of these tools, a little animated film pops out kind of telling you what this tool is and what it does. So the crop tool, it trims or expands an image, that kind of thing. And then you've even got access there to a little video that'll explain in a bit more depth how that particular thing works. So if you're not sure about what a certain tool is doing or what it's for, you can easily just go in and within the software get a little video that will help you understand how to use it. So that again is super, super useful. Now, just below where the kind of drop down menus are at the top, we also have this section of the screen here. This is what's called the options bar, and it's a little bit like the context bar over here in that it changes depending on what tool you've got selected. You see, as I step through these different tools, we get different options in that bit of the screen there. It'll sort of update and it'll give you additional controls that'll make it easier to work with the tool that you're using to try and achieve what you're after doing. So, you know, if you go into the marquee tools, it'll show you a range of options here. There's buttons where you can say, okay, I just want to make one selection. I can add to my selection, so I could draw one thing and then I could draw another selection and it would join them together. Or I can kind of refine my selection by drawing a new bit that will be removed from the original one, or I can arrive at a point where I overlap two selections on top of each other and it'll kind of keep the bit where they're overlapping, and a bunch of other things that we can change there. So depending on what you're doing, you'll see different things appearing in this bit of the screen here. Little shortcut to the select and mask window there. And yeah, depending on what you're doing, you will see different stuff appearing in this bit of the screen. So hopefully that's all fairly self-explanatory. Something that I should talk about is zooming on an image. So we've obviously got this image open here. So we do have a zoom tool down the bottom of the screen here. You can turn the zoom tool on by just pressing Z on your keyboard. That will activate that tool. If I just click my mouse, if you look at the mouse cursor, it's got a little plus sign in it at the minute. So if I want to zoom in on these plants here, I can just click a few times and it'll zoom in. If I press the Alt key, the plus on my mouse changes to a little minus, and now I'm zooming back out. So the zoom tool is dead useful for zooming in on a particular thing. Another way you can use it, let's say I want to zoom in on this window here, I can click on it and then I can drag the mouse to the right and it will zoom in, drag the mouse to the left and it will zoom back out. I don't tend to use that very much because it tends to make me feel a bit sick, but your use of it might vary from mine. Another shortcut is you can press Command and plus on the keyboard. That will zoom in, but it will just zoom in on whatever is in the middle of what you're currently looking at. Command minus will zoom back out. If you zoomed all the way in and then you want to jump all the way back out in one move, press Command and the 0 key on your keyboard, and that will jump back out and show you the image, all of it, all in one go. So that's quite handy. So, oh, and one more thing. So if you zoomed in and you want to move to see a different bit of the screen, but you don't want to zoom all the way back out again, you just want to move. If you just hold down your space bar, when I've got my finger on my space bar, my mouse cursor changes to this little hand, and then I can click and drag and move the image around on the screen. So that's kind of super handy, no pun intended. So I'm going to zoom all the way back out. Right, so the next thing that I want to discuss, and I want to do this fairly quickly because it tends to be something that you can get quite bogged down in if you start overthinking it, but it's something that we definitely need to discuss. The way that Photoshop makes up images and what this means in terms of what we need to know to get effective results out of the software, particularly if we are thinking about the end result being something that's going to be printed. So a really important thing to understand about Photoshop is it makes what's called resolution and size dependent images. So basically, Photoshop graphics have a fixed size, and usually you have to sort of decide what size the thing is that you're working on at the very beginning of the process. It's not that easy to change your mind later down the line. So, in other words, if your intention is to make an A3 poster, you need to create an A3 project. So, as an example, you can go File, New, and then you have this new document window. If you go into the print sort of presets, these options at the top here are all different types of preset document. And if I click view all, in there I've got an A3 document. So if I click on it, in the details section it tells us the exact width and height, and it also gives us this value here, the resolution. So we just need to briefly understand what resolution means. So resolution is usually measured in pixels per square inch, and this is a good quality for creating a printed final outcome. A printer needs 300 pixels in every square inch of its area in order for the printer to reproduce the image in a way that looks like a continuous image and not like something that's made up of little units of color or blocks. So I'm just going to close this and I'm going to zoom in on this image, and I'm going to carry on zooming in until I can't really zoom in any further. So when you zoom all the way into a Photoshop image, you start to notice that the image is actually made up of lots of tiny discrete units of color, and these are the things that we're talking about when we talk about pixels. So if it's 300 pixels per square inch resolution, that means there's 300 of these little dots in 1 square inch of that image. So why am I talking about this? Well, it just is really important to understand that there's this relationship between the size of the page and the resolution and what you can do with it at the end. How do pixels correspond to print? That's what the resolution is a measurement of. So this image came from a camera. The image's size, if we want to know how big an image is and we want to know what the quality of it is, we can go in and look in the image menu and look for this thing, image size. So if you've brought something in from a camera, or you found an image on the internet, or any kind of image that you're not really sure what is the quality and the size of this is how you can find out. You go to the image menu and you choose image size. So in here, it tells us how big the image is in terms of how many pixels tall and wide it is, and it gives us the resolution. We can also look at the size in different units, so we can change that from pixels to centimeters if we want to, understand it in terms of real world kind of measurements. So this image, it is already 300 pixels per square inch, so it's at print ready quality, and I could print it up to 50 centimeters wide without it losing any quality. So if you're not sure about how big an image is, or what its kind of quality is, its resolution, the image size menu is your kind of shortcut to finding that out. Now, there's a bunch of other stuff that we probably could talk about to do with this menu here, but again, it's something that is, you can get quite bogged down in it, and I don't really want to kind of talk about it for ages. But what I will do is I'm going to just put a link in the chat window now of a video that's from our eStudio resources that talks about image size and image quality and image resampling, which is something that's maybe worth giving some thought to if you're working, with a significant digital element to your design practice. So I'm just going to paste this in here, and you can watch that video whenever you want, and that will explain it fairly succinctly, but without it taking up half of my time that I've got to show you stuff today. So I'll just leave that there. So while we've got this image open, I'd just like to have a look at some very basic adjustments that we can make to an image that we've brought in. So maybe the first thing that I might want to do is maybe do a bit of an adjustment on the tonal range of the image. So I'm going to do this in a destructive manner, and then later on we'll look at how we can do these things non-destructively. So in other words, when I say that I'm doing a destructive edit to an image, what I'm talking about there is I'm permanently altering the pixels in the image if I do it in that way. And generally, it's a better idea to work non-destructively because it gives you a lot more flexibility. But we'll look at basic adjustments and then we'll look at non-destructive ways to do them later. So if I want to change the tonal balance of an image, the best way, or the most brute force easy way to do it, is to go into the image menu and look for the adjustments section. In the adjustments section of this menu, we have a bunch of different ways that we can kind of apply changes to the content of the image. And I'm doing it to the entire image, and I'm doing it, like I just said, in a destructive way. So if I want to change the tonal balance, I would do it using the levels adjustment. So I'm going to have a look at this. There is a keyboard shortcut for it there. Command and L will jump straight into the levels menu. So the levels menu is probably one of the more simple image adjusters. And just to briefly explain what we're looking at here. So this sort of section here, you can kind of use this to help you adjust the image. This is what's called a histogram, and it's basically a graph showing on a sort of scale going from the darkest pixels in the image at this end to the lightest pixels in the image at this end. And it's showing me how much of that makes up, how many of the pixels in the image are sitting whereabouts on that sort of scale. So there isn't any pure black at all in this image. We don't really get any dark pixels until we're around about here. And again, there isn't really any pure white in the image. There's a big gap there, and it sort of drops off around about there. So if I wanted to kind of adjust the tonal point, the tonal content, I can start to move these sliders here. So if I pull that in there, that's having the effect of darkening the darker pixels in the image. So I could probably go to around about there before it gets too dark. I could pull that in. That will start to brighten the brighter pixels. So I've kind of immediately got a lot more definition in my image there. Maybe if I move this out of the way, you can sort of see a bit more of the background. And then if I want to adjust the mid-tones, I've got this slider here. So I can kind of mess around and find something that I find more visually pleasing. It's probably the most simple adjustment you can do to an image, really. So any of these image adjustment menus, like levels or all the other ones that you'll find in that menu there, most of them have an auto option. So if I cancel that and then come back in and then click auto, I'll see what kind of result I'll get from that. See if it does anything similar to what I was doing. So it's gone a bit less heavy-handed than I did, but it's done more or less the same thing. It's pulled the darker pixels up a bit and it's pulled the lighter pixels up a bit. And it's left the midpoint more or less where it already was. So the auto thing can speed things up a bit, but it might not always give you what you want, but it might be a good starting point. I tend to hit auto and then look at it and think, well, actually, I maybe want a bit more drama in this image. So I'm going to kind of tweak it a bit, and maybe I would be a bit more happy with that. But it depends on the image and it depends on the task that you're undertaking, really. But the auto button is a really good kind of quick check of, okay, what might it look like if I let the computer kind of figure out what might be wrong with this. So I'm going to commit to that and say okay. But by doing that, what I've done is I've kind of made a permanent change to the image. If I saved it now over the top of the original file, I would basically have overwritten all of the pixels in the original image, and there wouldn't be any real way I could go back from there. I mean, I can undo. If you want to undo something, you can go edit, undo, levels, and it's gone back to how it was, or I can redo, or I can choose this toggle last state option, which will kind of flip backwards and forwards. And the keyboard shortcut for that is the Alt key, the Command key, and Z together. So that lets me kind of A and B my changes and make a decision. Do I think it looks better than it did or not? I think it probably does look a bit better. But that's quite a useful keyboard shortcut, I think, the toggle last state option there. So I'm thinking, I wonder what this might look like if I were to try and make it into a black and white image. There may be a couple of ways I could do that. So one way would be to go in here and look for this option here, desaturate. That means just remove the color from the image and replace them with corresponding shades of gray. So that's what it will do. It looks all right. It's maybe, I don't really have any control over what's happening though. It's just kind of either on or off. So I'm going to undo that. Another way I could maybe think about doing it is I could use the hue and saturation adjustment menu. So in there, you've got a bit more control over what's going on. You can use this to adjust the colors of an image. If I change the hue, I can go full on psychedelic filter or just a subtle change in either direction. But I'm not really interested in doing that. I just want to play with the saturation, so I can kind of pull the amount of color all the way down to nothing, or I can have a really subtle tiny bit of color bleeding in, or I can whack the color right up and make it really bright. So I've got a lot more control if I use the hue and saturation edit. And there's another thing you can do in here. If you choose colorize, that essentially gives you something quite similar to a kind of duotone image where it just replaces, it makes it black and white, but one of the colors is whatever color you choose here is the kind of light color that isn't black. And you can pull the colorize slider up to make that more or less pronounced. So you've got a bunch of different things you can try in there. Another thing that the hue and saturation menu will let you do is you can target specific colors. So let's say I wanted to just remove all of the color or remove all of the yellow from the grass at the front. So I can choose the yellows and then pull saturation down. And it's only really affecting the colors in the kind of foreground of the image there, because that's where all the yellow pixels in the image are, or I can boost them right up. So you've got a lot of selective editing power within this one menu here. It's really useful. And it's not just useful for doing basic image editing like a photograph. You could use it on graphic work as well to kind of completely change the color scheme of a piece of work with relative ease. I'm going to cancel that. Another thing that I could try is I can try just going to the black and white to return to my idea of wanting to explore removing the color from the image. I can choose a black and white adjustment. Now, this obviously gives me a lot more control over how it converts the colors into the kind of gray tones. So I can kind of pull these sliders around and adjust the way that the black is replacing the color or the white is replacing the color. I have a very wide range of control within there. So that's 4 or 5 different ways that we could achieve the same kind of effect. So that's quite typical of Photoshop. There's usually at least 4 or 5 different ways to do anything. It's kind of up to you really to find your own kind of workflow or find your own way of doing something. And each different image or each different editing task will maybe require that you think about it slightly differently each time. So maybe it's quite nice to have lots of different ways you can do something, because one way might work better for one image and another way will work better for a different one. So anyway, that's a bunch of different ways you can kind of tweak the colors and the general look of the image. Now, one other thing that I want to show you with this example before we move on to the next thing, I want to look at this tool here, the crop tool. So if we hover over it, it'll basically describe it for us. It trims or expands the edges of an image. So I'm just going to turn it on. I wonder why. Oh, has it done it? Yes. So I can click and draw a frame over my image. I should be able to anyway. Let's see. I need to zoom out a little bit. So we've got this kind of cropping frame here that I can move around, reframe it. If you notice though, when I'm dragging it, I'm not pressing any buttons or anything like that. It's fixed to a particular ratio at the minute. So that's all to do with the stuff up here in this little menu here. So at the minute, it's fixed to a particular width, height, and resolution, because somebody must have typed this in a previous demonstration. So I'm just going to clear that, and then let's look in here. So in here, we've got all these different kinds of ratio that we can choose. We can choose the original aspect ratio of the image. So we're kind of maintaining the width and the height relationship, but we're just sort of framing the image differently. Or we can choose a square aspect ratio, widescreen, cinema style thing, and a bunch of different other things. So there's all these different preset ratios in there. I think if I just go to that, if I just go clear, so I've set it on ratio and I've cleared the numbers that were in here, and now I can just freely drag and choose any kind of ratio that I want. So I don't have to stick to a kind of fixed ratio. If I want to just do it freehand, I just need to do that, set it to ratio, and then clear using that button there the numbers that are in these two boxes here, because those are the width and the height. If I want to rotate, I can do that. I'm just going to undo that. Right. If I don't want what I've got myself into, I can go to this button here and just get out of the crop. I can always come back over here and turn it back on again. There's some other useful things up here that we might need to look at. So I've got this sort of, I've made an arbitrary decision. I'm going to crop it to this. So up here, we've got this option here, delete crop pixels. So at the minute it's not ticked. So if I go, all right, I'm happy with that, and I click enter, it's cropped the image, but it hasn't deleted anything. All the stuff that was there originally is still there. And if I draw a new ratio thing and then start dragging it, it should revert back to the original thing. But it's not behaving in the way that it normally does, which is a bit unnerving. But anyway, let's just undo it. So that's the original thing there. You've also got a content aware thing. So this will actually let you crop kind of outside of the boundaries of the image. So I've extended that past the edge of where the thing was. I don't know why it's not turned on, actually. That's a bit annoying. Just bear with me a minute. I think my crop tool has gone a bit wrong today. Content aware. Okay. Right, it's not doing what it usually does, but normally if you turn that on, you can kind of expand it and it will invent something to fill the gap in, but for some reason this copy of Photoshop on this computer is not doing what it should be doing. Anyway, if you have delete crop pixels on and then you pull in and you crop it, all of this stuff here will just be permanently thrown away. If it's not turned on, you should be able to bring it back if your version of Photoshop is working properly, which hopefully yours is, even if mine isn't. I'm going to just eject from the crop tool and So the last thing I want to show you with this example is a couple of things actually. So I want to show you saving. So if I want to save this, because it's just a single layer and it was brought in as a JPEG, when I go to save, it just gives me the option to choose to save it as a JPEG. And then I can choose the quality of the image and I can click OK. That's pretty much all I can do. If I went, into the same menu again and chose Save As, then it's defaulting to saving it as a JPEG. But if I want, I can use this menu here to choose a different kind of format. So I could save it as a Photoshop document. I can export it as a PNG. I can save it as a TIFF and all these other formats. Those are the main things that you probably want to explore. Those are quite handy things to know about. If I wanted a PDF, I can do that from the Save As menu as well, I believe. Yes, Photoshop PDF, so that's quite a handy thing. So if I save this as a PDF, then we get this little PDF menu where we can choose the kind of PDF that we want to make. So it's defaulted to high quality print, which is good. If you wanted to make a reduced size PDF, you can choose smallest file size, and that will kind of compress it down. But for most things, if you want to retain the quality of the image as it is, you want either high quality or press quality, which is actually the best version of events that you can choose. I'm going to choose high quality print. And then because I'm using the preset from there, everything else I'm just going to leave it as it is because those options have already been set as part of the preset. So I'll save this as a PDF. And when you're saving something out like that, I didn't get there in time, but down here, there'll be a little kind of progress bar showing you how fast it's managing to save that file. And where's my PDF? It's now over here in my folder, notably miles bigger than the original JPEG. But anyway, so that's everything to do with this first example. I want to kind of close this down now and move on to our second example, if I can find where my folder's gone. Okay, let's just sort this out. Okay, so I'm going to open up exercise 2. So for this one, we're going to be putting together something like this from a selection of images. So this is all about ways of bringing content, various bits of content into one project and introducing the Photoshop concept of layers, which is fairly important. So I'm going to open this up as my start point. I've got this kind of simple background image, picture of a board against a kind of drop shadow against a wall. Now I want to start bringing in some content in, and I want to bring things in such a way that each new thing that I bring in is going to be put onto its own layer. So there's a particular way to bring stuff in. Now you can drag and drop straight in. You can copy and paste from one Photoshop document into another, but I like to do things in this way, and I'll explain why it's the best way to work in a minute. So I'm going to do this from the file menu. And the option I'm looking for is this, place embedded. So I'm going to choose that option, and then I'm going to look inside my images menu. So let's see what I'm going to bring in first. Pantone JPEG. Right, so it's brought it in. Obviously, it's a little bit bigger than maybe I would like. So I'm going to just do a bit of tweaking on it before I commit to it, because it hasn't finished placing the image in yet. When you see this kind of X through the middle, you kind of have to decide, all right, am I happy with it as it is, or do I want to adjust it? So I want to make it smaller. So I'm just going to grab one of these little handles in the corner, And as I'm doing this, I'm going to press the Shift key and hold it down because I don't want to accidentally do this. I can kind of stretch the image, but if I hit Shift, it locks the kind of width and height to be connected to each other, so I can't accidentally stretch. So I'm going to make it about that sort of size. I'm just going to put it over here. And then I can either just hit the Enter key on my keyboard, or I can use my little context bar to commit to that transform that I did there. So I've brought that in. So why is it different if I use this place embedded thing? Where is it? File, place embedded. What's different about this than if I'd just copied and pasted it or just dragged it in? Well, if we look at the layers panel in here, it'll kind of maybe give us a bit of a clue. So I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit. So that's my standard kind of pixel background layer. If you look here, you've just got a little preview. Then on my new layer, where I brought my Pantone thing in, we've still got this kind of little preview. Whenever you see this sort of checky pattern in Photoshop, that's telling you that the rest of that layer is transparency, or it's a see-through kind of thing. This icon here is the thing that I'm talking about. This is what I want to sort of alert you to. What's different when you bring something in as an embedded placed thing. So whenever you see this icon on a layer, this is telling you that it's been brought in as what's called a smart object. So the concept of smart objects is a little bit convoluted to explain, but basically I've still got all of the original pixel information there. Even though I sized that down when I brought it in, all the original pixels are still there unchanged, and it's as if I've kind of done the adjustment or done the transform on a kind of sealed off thing that it's retaining all of the original data. So if I change my mind and I want to transform that again, so let's do edit. Sorry, I'm on the wrong layer. Command T to turn my transform back on again. And then if I size that back up again, I'm not losing any quality every time I edit that. I can kind of size things down and then I can size them back up again, and it'll still retain all of the pixel information from the original version of that thing before I placed it in, and it kind of re-renders the image each time I transform it. So this is really, really super useful, because if you somebody that might change your mind a fair bit when you're in the middle of doing a design thing, if you keep transforming something over and over again and kind of scaling it down and scaling it back up again, if you were doing that with just a standard pixel layer, each time you did it, you're going to degrade the image and it's going to end up looking really dodgy. Whereas if we work with smart objects, this is one reason why smart objects are good, and we'll maybe touch on a few of the others later. We can freely kind of work with it and not worry about losing any of the kind of resolution that is inherent in that kind of layer. So that's what that little icon is telling us there, and that's what happens when you use place embedded. So I've placed that in. We've already looked at the free transform thing. I'm gonna have a look at place embedded again. I wonder if I can. No, I can only do one thing at a time, so I'm going to choose this one. And again, it's bringing it in as a smart object. I'm going to size it and hit enter to commit. So we've got multiple layers now. We've got the background layer, the Pantone layer, and the suitcase layer. So if I don't start changing the order, the most recently added thing will be at the top of the pile of layers. Just to briefly kind of look at the layers here, this is pretty useful. We can kind of hide or show the content of a layer using that little eyeball icon. If I go to this bit and move it, you can see that it's true. The order that they appear in dictates what you can see. The Pantone thing is underneath this now. If I grab that layer and pull it up, now it's on the top. So we can freely change the order of the things in our layers stack and rearrange them like this. Now, what tool am I using to grab things and move them around? I'm using this first tool in the toolbar, the Move tool. The keyboard shortcut for the Move tool is V on the keyboard. And another very useful thing that I've got turned on is this auto select option up here. So if you have auto select turned on, I can just click on something, and if you look at what's happening in the layer panel, it just automatically selects the layer of the thing that I clicked on. If I didn't have auto select turned on, all right, I want to try and move the Pantone thing. Oh, the other thing's moving because I'm still in the suitcase layer, or the suitcase layer is the active layer, and I'd have to physically move to the other layer to be able to move it. So depending on what you're doing, you probably will want auto select turned on most of the time. Sometimes it can be a bit annoying if you have loads of different things on the screen, and you might keep accidentally selecting the wrong thing if you have it turned on, but those cases are fairly rare, I would say. So I'm gonna just continue on with this, grab a few more things and put them in. So I can scale this down, I can rotate it slightly, basic things. If I'm rotating and I press the shift key, it constrains it to 15 degrees of rotation and kind of snaps to those numbers. So that's quite handy sometimes. And when you're happy with something, you can just hit the enter key. Now, going back to the idea of layers, let's say I'm quite happy with this arrangement of things here, and I want to maybe treat these three images here all as one thing, and then maybe if I want to turn them all off or move them all together, I can kind of do that more easily. Or let's say I want to organize my layer panel just to make it more simple for me to work out what's what. When you've got lots of different elements on your screen, imagine if you had lots of type and you had loads of different embedded images and each thing is on its own layer. Rapidly, this list can become quite epically long, and you might have your panel options view set to a much smaller thing like this, and it's more difficult for you to work out what's going on. I'm just changing that from that little 3-line menu in the top corner there. If I want to kind of tidy things up and organize them, I'm going to select all of these layers here. So I've clicked the top one, and then if I press the shift key and click the bottom one, that selects all of the layers between those two clicks. Or you can press command and click on the things that you want to select if you want to select a group of things. And I want to put these into what's called a group. So you've got this little icon at the bottom of the screen here that looks like a folder. So I've selected these already, and then if I hit there, it's put them into a group, and I can change the name of the group by just double clicking there. My amazing group. And that's everything is in there. So now if I click on this, it's actually auto expanded the group when I clicked on that image, and it's selected there because my auto select thing is set to layer. So if you start working with groups, you might want to change it from selecting a layer to selecting a group. Now when I click on that, it selects the whole group and everything will move as if it's one thing. If that was turned on to layer and I click there, it's drilled into my group and it's selected that, and that's moving separately from the other things. So a few little kind of tricks and tips there for kind of organizing how you're working with a range of things once you've started to get a bunch of different images in your composition. Now, let's see. Another thing we can do, so I've selected that layer and I've just gone Command C on my keyboard or Edit, Copy. I can go Edit, Paste, and I've now got a copy of that layer. Got two versions of the same thing there. So pasting in, copy and paste, it just works like any other kind of bit of software really. Command Z to undo all of that. A useful thing, let's say I wanted to kind of copy everything that I've got there as one flat layer. I could go Command A to select everything, and then I can choose Copy Merged. So that's copied everything that the computer can see, everything that's visible at the minute. And then if I do Command V, and I'm just going to drag that up to the top of my stack of things. So I've basically got a flattened single layer version of my whole thing. That's the whole lot of what I've had up to now, all kind of compressed into one layer. But I've still got all of my individual pieces underneath it within this group. So sometimes that using that copy merged feature is a very handy thing to kind of quickly kind of merge everything together into one layer. I'll revisit that in a minute because it sort of refers to something about smart objects that is very kind of important to understand. So for this, if I was going to save this, I would definitely want to save as and choose Photoshop as my image format. If I save as a Photoshop file, all this stuff in the layers section here will be retained. So all the sort of separate layers will still be there the next time I open it. It's as if I've kind of saved it at the point where I'm at the minute for continuing to work on it later. It won't flatten it. It'll retain all of the editability and everything. Everything that I've got there will still be there the next time I open it. I won't be able to do any undos when I open it the next time because it won't remember all of the steps that I took up to the point when I saved it, but it'll remember this is where I left off. So I would say in progress mood board and then save that as a Photoshop file and just click OK to let it do it. And then in that folder I would now have three versions of that. One that's the initial thing. I've got a finished version there that I haven't opened yet, and the in progress one. So when you're working on something and you want to carry on working on it, that's the best format to save it as. Now, I think that's a really good point to pause for maybe a short break and come back in, let's say, 20 minutes. So it's now just coming up to 2:05. So I'll come back here at, let's say, 2:25, and we'll carry on with part 2 of this where I'll work through the next 2 examples. I'm just going to put a timer on the screen so you know how long is left. So let's say 20-minute timer. And I want to find one that hasn't got really awful music on it. Let's try this one. Okay, so I'll just put this over here so you can see, and I will be back when the timer runs out. So yeah, go and get a cup of tea or something and have a break from listening to me going on about this. I'll see you in a bit.